The following presentation was recorded live for the International Association of Square Dance Callers 19th Annual Convention. We take you live to Virginia Beach, Virginia, where our session is just getting underway.
Ladies, if you'd take your seat, please, we'd like to start this session. Our speaker this afternoon on developing personal power is Julia Dodd. Julie has been the director of the Women's Center at Old Dominion University for 10 years and has been involved in women's issues for the past 20 years. She grew up in a socially conscious and politically active family in West Virginia and learned very early about the importance of working to create a world where all people, regardless of sex, race, or class, can develop their full potential. Julie became interested in the topic of developing personal power through her life experiences and her work in the women's movement. She sees her life work as empowering women and empowering the feminine qualities of nurturance, cooperation, and compassion in women and men. She believes there is unlimited power available to individuals as they begin to recognize the choices in their lives. She believes that the healing of the planet begins with the healing of the individual. As people learn to claim their personal power, they begin to claim responsibilities for creating a better world. Julie has a master's degree in counseling and guidance from West Virginia University and an undergraduate degree in sociology. She teaches classes on developing personal power and has done training and consulting with a number of universities and community groups, including the Junior League, Navy Family Services, the Certified Professional Secretaries Association, Financial Women International, and Virginia College Personal Association. May I present Julia Dodd.
Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. And I know you got here on a rather beautiful day and it turned cold on you today, so at least you're inside. I'm really excited to be with you this afternoon to talk with you about developing personal power, because for me, this really is perhaps the most basic and primary issue for women these days, to look at how to claim our power, and really also for men to do the same thing. As we talk a little bit this afternoon, you will probably come to see that both men and women have similar issues with this topic. But let me tell you how I got into Well, can you hear me? Okay, so we will put that in the category of one of those things that's out of our control. And as we talk a while this afternoon, you'll see that that is another very important issue as we look at the topic of power, beginning to look at the things we can control in our lives and change, and start eliminating those that we cannot control, because frequently those are the things that we allow to disempower us. But let me start by telling you that I really have 3 goals for our time this afternoon. And that is, first of all, that you have some fun. I think life should be fun. And when we're following what it is we need to do in our lives, generally it is fun and we're happy and we feel good about ourselves and other people. I hope also that today you will take something away that's useful to you in your lives. That not only will we have a good time here this afternoon, but you'll take away some practical points that you can begin, if it speaks to you, implementing them in your own life so that you will become more empowered. And finally, I hope that you will leave here trusting yourself more than you do right this moment. Another way of talking about becoming empowered is how much we trust our own inner wisdom. And all of us at this point in time are somewhere on this continuum, from this end of feeling completely disempowered, like we have absolutely no control over our lives, all the way to the side of feeling fully empowered. I don't think we ever get here. This is part of life's work, is to become more and more empowered. But hopefully, in our time this afternoon, you'll leave with some things that will help you learn to trust yourself more and feel more empowered in your own lives. I use the word personal empowerment or developing personal power the same as learning to live with integrity, learning to trust ourselves, learning to listen to our own inner wisdom, learning to live honestly. Because we all come into this world empowered. It is our natural state. And you see this in little children. Those of you who have children know this. Little children act on what they need to do. They're honest about their feelings. You may not want to hear them all the time, but they are very honest. Little children are empowered. What happens, though, that at this point in our lives as adults of varying ages, we begin to think something has happened that we don't feel very empowered any longer. So how can we begin to reclaim some of that childlike feeling of feeling empowered, of feeling in sync with the world? Another way of talking about this is it's also about developing your intuition. You all know what your intuition is. How many of you know what it is? How many of you listen to your intuition at times? Any of you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say intuition? Just raise your hand. I'm not going to ask you to say anything. Okay, so you all have an idea what I mean. Intuition is your inner teacher. In fact, it comes from the Latin words that combine to mean inner teacher, inner wisdom. It's that gut feeling inside of you. It's what feels right. And most of us, by the time we're adults, don't follow those intuitive promptings any longer. And what I want to suggest to you this afternoon is that intuition is really the key to becoming empowered in our lives. Because if you think about most of us, we grow up in a very rational, logically oriented world. You all know what your rational mind is like. It's very much like a computer. So that your rational mind has available to it everything that you've learned in your life up until this point. Everything that you've studied, read about, experienced, all of the things that make up who you are is available to your rational mind. And it's an important part of who we are, because that rational mind can then take out all the information you know and combine it in appropriate ways to make decisions about your life and what you need and what you want to do. But there's another part of us, and that's the intuitive part, that we seem to know much less about. And that's why I think you're hearing so many more people talk about this these days, about intuition. Because I think that what's happened over some 2,000 years is that we've kind of reversed how things really could be, so that, in other words, we rely almost totally upon our rational mind to make decisions in our lives. Now, I'm not discounting the importance of that. It's a very important part of who we are. But there's this other part, this intuitive part, that I believe is really what was meant to be our guiding principle in our lives. Or, for those of you who are religious, I believe that our intuition is our connection with God, or our connection with the divine. That it's that inner voice inside of you that always knows what's best for you, that always knows what you need, and can help you get there if you will just begin to listen. And I want to say a little bit more about this before I move on, and we may come back to this issue of intuition in a little bit. But essentially, all you really need to do to contact your intuition, and I think all of you have had this experience of following intuitive promptings and then they turned out to be right, even when they didn't make any sense to your logical mind. You have probably also had the experience of not following those intuitive promptings and finding out later, if I had just listened to whatever you call it, whether you just call it that feeling or my intuition, things would have turned out better. To follow this intuition, it really only takes quieting your mind and your body. And I say it really only takes that. It sounds very simple, and yet I also know that for many of us, because we live such hectic, stressful lives with all of the responsibilities that we have with our home, our children, our spouses, our jobs, whatever you may have in your life, all of us these days, almost without exception, I think, are living much too harried lives. So we're unable to get in contact with this part of us that is really meant to be our guiding principle. So all it takes is finding a way to relax your mind and body and to then ask, listen, and act on what you hear. And by that I mean you may, for example, if you could just begin to take, how many of you meditate? Do any of you meditate regularly? A couple of you. Okay. Again, meditation in the traditional sense, we always thought of it as being something real, took years to develop the discipline and that sort of thing. All I mean by meditation is taking time out of your day to quiet your mind and body, to relax and to go into a silent prayer, if you will, or just into listening. That's what meditation is. And if you can begin to do that, it will open up answers for you about whatever issues you're dealing with in your life. Another little piece about this I want to say for this moment would be your intuition is also following your desires or following what calls you. We've all had this experience, even if it's been a long time ago in our lives, where something really called us, that something we felt we had to do. And if you followed that calling, it probably turned out very positive in your life. If you didn't, chances are you still can think back on those times and think, what if I had only done or responded to that call? Okay, so all of this is about personal power. Now let me jump over to the side for a second and talk a little bit about the blocks to personal power. And then, after that, I'm going to go into some strategies for developing personal power in your life. But let me talk just a little bit about the blocks, and this is not the fun part of the talk. It's also could be a number of workshops around any of these issues. But the primary blocks to developing our personal power, I believe, are blaming, anger, guilt, and fear. And we all know these emotions, right? To the extent that you're blaming anything or anyone in your life for you not having or being or doing what it is you want to do or be in your life, to that extent, you're giving away your power. Now, I'm not saying that makes you a bad person, because most of us grow up in a culture that kind of teaches us to put our power outside of us. It's like, well, it's because of my husband or my wife that I'm not happy, or it's because of my kids, or it's my job, or whatever, or it's because I don't have money. All of these things we use as excuses to say that we're not happy. What I'm going to suggest to you is that to the extent that you can begin to eliminate that kind of blame, you will begin to recognize that wherever you are in your life right now, you do have choice, that we all have choices, and that we can choose to consciously make choices to bring about more happiness or serenity or fulfillment in our lives, or we can choose to continue to kind of put it outside and say, no, it's because of so-and-so that I'm not who I want to be or how I want to be, or I'm not living the way I want to be. And I'm going to say a little more about that in a bit, but blame is a big block to becoming empowered. Anger is another one. Anger is probably the most misunderstood emotion that we humans experience. And for most of us, anger, we feel anger when we feel like someone or something has not given us what we needed or wanted, or someone has harmed us, or we think someone has hurt us, or someone's broken a commitment to us. We get angry when that happens. The other side of that same coin is guilt. We feel guilty when we feel like we have hurt someone else, or not done what we said we would do for someone else, or not followed through on our commitments. We generally feel guilty. Now, both of these emotions can keep you very stuck and disempowered. To the extent that you can recognize those emotions and let them be teachers in your life, then you don't have to stay stuck with it. So that, in other words, the real purpose, I believe, of anger and guilt is to tell us that something isn't right in our lives, that we need to put some attention to whatever it is that's making us angry or that's allowing us to feel guilty. And if we use it in that way, it becomes a very useful emotion, because that's what anger was designed for. Anger is a teacher. Anger tells us when we're not getting what we need. And we don't have time, unfortunately, this afternoon about what all we can do with that to go further with that emotion and how to then look at what it is we need. But suffice it to say right now that that's the real purpose of anger. Anger is there as a guide in your life. But beneath both anger and guilt is really fear. It's the fear that we're not okay just the way we are. It's the fear that we aren't enough, that we aren't enough to someone else or to ourselves or to our children or our partners. Beneath all of this is fear and doubt. Most of the things that we could talk about, even if we had days together, that keep us blocked in our lives come down to these several emotions: anger, guilt, fear, and doubt. Now, I don't have to talk about the very positive emotions right now because that's not a problem for most of us. Most of us, when we're feeling good and happy and light, we don't need to have a workshop about that. We need to have a workshop to talk about what do we do with these other kinds of emotions that come up. So, what do we do about all this? Let's talk a little bit. I'm going to give you a framework for developing personal power that will begin to incorporate some of the things I've already said and go further with it. And what I'm going to talk with you about are 5 points of power that come from a book called Guiding Yourself into Spiritual Reality, which is a book by Peggy Dillon Birkin. And I have used these 5 points of power in my life for at least the last several years. And as I go through these with you, you'll see that in many ways they sound very simple, and they are, much like life really is very simple. But again, we get so harried and so out of sync, out of balance in our lives, that it doesn't feel simple any longer. It often feels like a burden to too many people, and that's not what it was meant to be. Our lives were meant to be opportunities to learn and to grow and to learn how to love, and on and on and on. But all of this other gets in our way. So as I go through these 5 points of power, let me say first that to the extent that you're not doing these things in your lives, and you do begin to take some of these points into account, they will change your lives dramatically. I can promise you that, both from my experience and from the experience of lots of other people that I've talked with and people that I've met along the road on my path. But also let me say that I think it's very important when you're looking at your life, looking at the kind of changes you might want to make, the kind of changes you'd like to see in other people, perhaps the most important element to remember is that we all need compassion, that we need compassion for ourselves, and that for women especially, and I think for men too, is frequently the most difficult, is to really develop compassion for ourselves. And then, it's like the old saying, you really can't love anyone until you know how to love yourself. Well, I think that's true. But I also think you can't love yourself until you're learning how to love others. I don't think it's an either or, in other words. I think they develop kind of in line with each other. So that, in other words, a lot of what we're really talking about here today is also opening up to love and compassion in your life. Because then the kinds of steps you need to take to bring about the changes, to become more empowered, to feel more alive, come very easily, quite frankly. The struggle, then, you let it go. So let me go through these 5 points. The first one is to pay attention. And by this, I don't mean just your casual kind of attention. By paying attention, we mean don't talk so fast. By paying attention, I mean 100% of the time. So that, in other words, pay attention to your feelings. Pay attention to all of your feelings. And this is a difficult one for many of us, because we live in a culture that has taught us from a very early age to deny our feelings, especially the feelings we label negative. Most of us have been taught to kind of stuff those feelings. And to the extent that you're doing that, you don't even know what it is you need in your life, because our feelings, which are they're not quite as deep, I don't think, as our intuition, but they are connected with our intuition. Our feelings are our information about what we need in our lives. So they're very important to become aware and be able to acknowledge all of your feelings. What you do with those feelings is another step. And choosing how and when to express your feelings is another part that we won't have time to talk about today. But in other words, let me use the example of anger. Some people say that when you say you need to express all your feelings, that means you need to express all your anger all the time. Well, I don't believe that, because I think what happens with that is frequently we end up dumping our anger on others, that it really doesn't belong, in places where it really doesn't belong. What's important is that we be in touch with that feeling, and if we can learn to then stop and say, okay, I'm feeling angry, what do I want to do about this? Sometimes just the stopping will allow you to get a little more, use the rational mind then to think through, what do you want to do with that? If it's anger towards your partner, you probably are going to have to find a way to talk about it, because otherwise it's just going to stay stuck, and it's going to get in the way of you all being able to relate in a more harmonious way. If it's anger at someone on the interstate that just bumped you over into your lane, chances are you're not going to be able to do anything very healthy with that emotion on the interstate. So the important thing there would be to acknowledge it. Okay, I feel angry. Someone just bumped me off the road, and I need to release this so that I can drive in a safe way. Just to contrast there, if it works. So paying attention to all of your feelings, paying attention to your thoughts and your beliefs, because our thoughts are how we see the world. How we think about things is really connected to the kind of mental work that's going on in our heads, in other words. So you've all heard the saying that the glass is either half empty or half full. What's the difference in the two people? It's the same glass, but what is it in the one person who's able to kind of always look for the positive, and the other one who's probably very frequently looking at the negative side of things? And this is probably a good point to stop and say, I'm not one of those who says you can always be positive all of the time, because these kinds of emotions come up, and as I said earlier, they are information about what we need. But the important thing is for us to take that back and claim the ability ourselves to make the changes instead of putting it outside on someone else, or saying, unless my husband changes, we can't, this marriage isn't going to work. Well, I would suggest if the marriage is in trouble, just to use that example, unless both of you are willing to look at it and make some changes, it isn't going to work. Or one of you is going to be pretty unhappy all the time. So again, that issue of looking at what we can change in our lives and focusing there, which of course always means ourselves. We can always change ourselves. We can always change how we look at things. We can even change how we feel about things by telling ourselves different things about the same scenario. I heard a real interesting story that I want to share with you from a woman that I've used a lot of the material in her books in some of my workshops. Leah Craft Christine wrote a book called 30 Days to Happiness, which I thought I would never buy, but in fact there's a lot of wisdom in that book. And I was at a workshop with her recently, and she was talking about a story in her life where she was born crippled. And from the very beginning of her life, and they were very, very poor, and her mother worked diligently with her feet to try to form them in a way that she could walk again. And about the age of 4 or 5, I believe it was, her feet had straightened out just enough that she could wear shoes. But she could only wear 2 left shoes, or orthopedic shoes. And I've already said they were very poor. Well, she remembers that evening, the first day she was able to put these shoes on, very little girl, right? She remembers her father coming home and her mother telling him how excited she was. Her mother was just bursting with joy that Leah was going to be able to wear shoes. But she would have to have 2 pairs of shoes so she could have 2 left shoes or orthopedic shoes. And what Leah remembers is her father just going out the roof. He was very angry and said, "We can't afford 2 pairs of shoes, or we can't afford orthopedic shoes. Why can't she just go barefoot?" Now, most of us, when we hear that story, we go, what a horrible thing for that child to hear. Well, in reality, what the father was obviously experiencing, and what Leah, it took her many years later to really understand this, was that he was so poor, he didn't have the money to buy these shoes, and he felt bad that he couldn't buy what his daughter needed. And I share that story with you because more than a lot of others I've heard, for me it really crystallizes how here we had a man who was doing the very, very best he could for his family, but couldn't afford what his daughter needed at that point. And so he lashed out in anger. What she heard as a young child was, I'm a burden on my family, or I should just disappear, or I'm not worthy of the shoes, or whatever. Now, we all have incidents like this in our lives. We have little ones that are not quite of the magnitude that I think that one impacted her life. And we all have perhaps bigger incidents that you can remember in your life of things like that that happened. And the reason that's so important to begin to get in touch with some of that is because if you're carrying around stuff like that, it's also keeping you stuck. Because we're allowing things that have happened throughout our lives to kind of keep us stuck in our adult life. I grew up in an alcoholic family and spent a lot of my life, adult life, blaming my mother and father, that for my not being happy. And it took me getting into my own, getting to a place in my own life where it just hurt enough that I thought there's got to be another way to look at this. And so I went through a whole series of lots of things. I went into therapy. I did a lot of different things in my life to begin my own healing process. And it's like these days, I still have the same parents, and I'm very, very thankful that they're both in recovery. So they are both sober, but they are alcoholics. But what I know now about that family is that they did the very best they knew how, that they loved me as much as anyone could have loved. They just had their own issues because of where they came from. All of these stories are to remind you that when we can stop and remember the compassion and develop that sense of compassion for each other and for ourselves, really it would solve all of the world's problems. It's really that simple. And I believe this is what is at the basis of all of the world religions, is that we are really just here to learn how to love. The rest of this stuff that we're talking about is just the content. It's not the real stuff. Love and compassion is the real issue, and it starts with yourself. The other part around this paying attention is learning to stay present. How many of you spend so much of your time, you may be sitting in this room and you're thinking about all the things you haven't done, or all the things that you left at home that are still not done or not caught up, or the things you're going to do tonight. Most of us live most of our lives not in the present moment. And of course, I believe we can't really feel content, fulfilled, happy unless we're in the present moment, because that's where connection with other people, that's where love, that's where everything exists, is in the moment. So it's like we get stuck in the past, and hang on to the things we're angry about, or the people that wronged us, or the things we feel guilty about, the people we didn't do what we said we were going to do, and so on. So we stay stuck in that stuff. Or we get focused on the future and what it is we need to do. And Bernie Siegel, if any of you have heard of his book called Love, Medicine, and Miracles, he tells a great story about a little girl who writes a letter to him. And I don't even remember the beginning of it. All I remember is the little girl saying something like, there's today and tomorrow and to now. And we need to learn to live in to now and forget tomorrow and yesterday a lot of the time. Again, it's not to exclude the importance of everything you've learned and all that and the kinds of responsibilities you'll be taking care of in the future, but I will guarantee you'll have more energy and aliveness if you can learn to stay more in the moment. Another part of this paying attention is to use your body as a barometer. Our bodies can tell us everything it is we need to know about what we need in our lives. Okay. I hope that's preparation for your party later or something. A good example of this, probably each of you knows that part of your body that starts to ache when you feel stressed. For me, I either start to get a stomach ache or my neck starts to hurt. When I'm in a situation where I'm under stress, or if I'm in a situation where I don't want to be, you begin to feel it in your body. Or you begin to just feel bored, a loss of energy. When you follow the energy of your body, when you listen to it, you begin to feel more enlivened, more energy, more power. Another example about this would be, most of us, when we get the flu or we get a bad cold, it's really because we needed to slow down and take care of ourselves. And if we'd listened to those little messages along the way, we would probably stay a lot healthier physically and emotionally and mentally and spiritually. But we're talking about the physical right now. So beginning to learn to follow your body's energy. I want to say a side note here, too, is that this is not saying that we're to blame when we get disease. I believe that disease is a teacher, that it gives us information about what it is we need. Even Western medicine, I believe, is now kind of catching up with what Eastern medicine. If we could combine the best of Eastern and Western medicine, we would have so much more available to us. Well, our Western doctors are beginning to catch up with the idea that the mind and the body are connected, so that we need to be able to listen to our body and to our mind about what it is we need in our lives. So that's why you're hearing a lot more about holistic medicine these days and about mind-body healing and that sort of thing, because it's a combining of what I believe is very ancient knowledge with Western technology. I hope you all can hear. Are we? Hold it. Will this help? Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, finally, one other piece on the paying attention is also about learning to release the blocks in your life. When you're holding anger in or holding in pain, holding in guilt, those sorts of things, it creates blocks in your energy. Keeps you stuck, keeps you immobilized. Anger and guilt serve to keep us immobilized unless we know how to work with them, which, as I said earlier, means take a look at what it is you need to do in your life to change that situation. Finally, I'll just say about paying attention. This is where we say, show up for your life. Or this is not a dress rehearsal, it's the real thing. Or at least it's what we know. If you like to eat, if you like gourmet food, and you're having a gourmet meal of all your favorite foods, and if you have a cold, you can't taste anything, right? That's how most of us live our lives. Like we have a cold all the time, and we're not paying attention to all of the beauty and all that is available to us in our lives if we would just open up and look and listen. All of the points don't take quite this long. The second point of power I want to talk about is speaking the truth. This is kind of where say what you mean and mean what you say. You've all heard that saying before, I'm sure. There is a tremendous amount of wisdom in that, because it means that if we are saying what we mean and meaning what we say, we're creating internal harmony. We learn to trust ourselves more. It aligns us, again, you're going to hear me saying this a lot this afternoon, this idea of energy. And, you all know what energy is. You know what it feels when you have a lot of energy. Well, when we speak the truth, well, I jumped onto another one because it fits in another place too, it does align us and open us up to tremendous energy in our lives. And that's where, earlier as Karen was introducing me, she said, I think we all have unlimited power available to us. I do, to the extent that we're living in harmony with the universe and with the spiritual principles that are available to all of us, then we do open ourselves up to unlimited power. And it also creates, I mentioned the internal harmony, but of course peace of mind too. It creates peace of mind. And it allows us to learn to trust ourselves, and others trust us more when we speak the truth. Because you all have this experience both with yourself and other people. You know when people are telling the truth, and you know when they're not most of the time. You feel it. You can feel it inside if you just pay attention. The third point of power is to ask for what you want. Now, this one is frequently a very difficult one for a lot of women. And of course, in order to ask for what you want, you need to know what it is you want. And that's a much longer topic, but if you'll remember back to as I opened up a few minutes ago, one way to work with this is just to begin listening to your intuition, begin developing your intuitive voice so that you can hear, so that you can listen to that wisdom that is inside of you. We all have all of the answers that we need inside. And we've been taught to go to experts for everything. We've been taught to go to doctors for our health care, to ministers for our religious answers, to academic types for intellectual knowledge, whatever. All those people have a lot of knowledge, and so do you. And it's like all of those experts outside, to me, are tools. They're information that you need to then filter through your own wisdom. Because whether it's me standing up here talking to you or whoever you have the most respect for in the whole world, you think the authority on whatever standing up here talking to you, unless you filter it through what's right for you, then it's not your truth. And I do believe that for all of us, this is our work. Our work is to discover our own truth and then act on it. And that's different for each of us. We all have unique parts of who we are that we need to uncover, and that is our responsibility. So asking for what you want, getting in touch first with what it is, and then learning to ask for it. The other reason I think we don't ask for what we want is because most of us fear rejection. We're afraid that we won't get what we want. And especially women, I think, in this culture are taught from a very, very early age to take care of everybody else's needs at the expense of our own. Now, the taking care of others' needs is a wonderful strength. It's a great thing. I mean, it's what keeps us all connected, helping to take care of other people. But when we're doing that at the expense of our own needs, it becomes a problem. And for some people, it then becomes a very serious problem. It creates a lot of resentment, for example. It's like, you all probably all heard the term codependence. Codependence simply means focusing on the needs of others or another at the expense of your own. Again, it's wonderful to be able to tune into other people's needs as long as you're including yours in there as well. There's a prominent psychologist at Harvard, Carol Gilligan, who has done a lot of work on women's moral development. And one of the things that she's discovered is that for women, the most difficult thing to do in life, and I think this is true for most of us, is to begin to include ourselves in the circle of who it is we care about. It's like, I grew up with a mother who gave and gave and gave to everyone. And she was the one who, she would never take the last piece of pie kind of thing, or everybody else got whatever it was that was being given out. My mother always took less. And growing up, I thought that was a wonderful thing. The older I got, though, what I began to see is when you continually do that, you begin to get resentful. Because what happens is we're taught to do that, and then we assume, let's just use the example in our relationships with our spouses or partners. If you're always second-guessing what you think your partner needs and doing everything you can to fulfill that need, your expectation, I'll wager, is that he or she is doing the same thing. And when they don't, then you get resentful. And, of course, all of this is generally unspoken. It's all these assumptions that we make instead of checking them out. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, because there's strength that comes out of it. But what I'm saying is I think it creates disharmony in relationships because it's then out of balance. So that it's important as women and as men that we learn to take into account our own needs and to act on those needs and communicate about them within our relationships. And a caution here would be, though, if you're the kind of person who never puts your needs first, I don't suggest that you go out of this room and all of a sudden start putting your needs first. Because everyone around you will start to get, like, what's going on here? And begin to resent you and so on, and what's happening to mom or to my wife or to my husband or whatever. So that if any of what I'm talking with you about today is speaking to you, take these changes gently. That's my encouragement. I think I'm sort of like a turtle sometimes, though. I like to move slowly because I think the changes are more lasting then. And because that gives you a chance to communicate with the people that you care about. That, hey, I heard some things, or I've been thinking about some things that I think I want to try to do in my life, and I want to incorporate in my life. And this is what I'm going to be trying to do, and I want your support with this. You know, you can't expect to have understanding from those around you if you are making changes, if you don't give them a chance to know what's going on with you as well. Okay, so I've mentioned the fearing, the asking, and that sort of thing. Of course, the overall with all of this is to recognize really that you are the source of your own reality. That, in other words, it is how you, the story you tell yourself about the circumstances in your life that create your life. Like, you know, back to the glass is half empty or half full. It's like you have the power to change the words that you're using about your life right now, about the things that are not working. Again, I don't think we need to talk about the things that are working. Those you have no problems with. But the things that don't feel right or don't feel good in your life, you do have the power to change what's happening in those circumstances. But it may happen much slower than you would like to see. So I encourage a lot of compassion here with yourself and with the people around you that you care about. A helpful piece of this, I think, is to, if you can learn to observe yourself and your own changes, your own process, as you would your child or a friend that you care very much for, someone that you can love unconditionally. If there's someone like that in your life, or it may be a religious figure, it may be Jesus Christ. If you can begin to treat yourself the way Jesus would treat you, that's really all you have to do. If you could begin to treat everyone else in your life the way Jesus would treat them, that's all you really have to do. That's the easy part of this. And again, I know it isn't easy, but that's really how simple it is. Another part of this asking, though, and I've talked around this some, is the idea of setting limits and setting boundaries in your life. That means both with other people and with yourself. And let me start with yourself. I've mentioned some of the kinds of negative emotions, we label them negative, that get us stuck. This is one area where you can learn to be to set limits in your life. So that, in other words, if, let's say, your child is in a classroom with some teachers that just really anger you, and you've tried everything you can to change that situation, everything you can think of, and nothing's worked. Okay, so you don't have any more options that you can come up with to change the situation, but you've still got a lot of anger about it. It's like, this isn't fair. You don't want your child in this kind of environment. Well, one way of working with that would be literally to set time limits around that. Say, okay, I'm going to think about this situation for the next 20 minutes. And I'm just going to feel angry and upset and that the world isn't fair and the schools should be better and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And just do all the ranting and raving you need to with anyone that wants to listen, or journal it, or however you want to do it. And get those emotions out. And then go on about your life. And sometimes that's how we need to work with negative emotions, is to just give ourselves a specific amount of time to feel them. Believe it or not, folks, this really works. And then we allow that feeling to go through us a bit, and we can go on with the rest of our lives. And again, it'll come up later. You know, another emotion, same situation, different situation. Likewise, it's very important to be able to set boundaries with other people. This is back to the issue of codependence. Many of you have done this. I've done this. I've done this in my life where I was always available to anyone I cared about. Friend, my husband, my family, whoever it was. I was available to anyone who needed me any of the time. Until I lost my sense of who I was. And I really got to a place in my life where I thought, something's got to change here, or I don't really want to be around much longer. Life isn't supposed to be like this. And again, I began a very long process of healing a lot of my own issues. So learning to set boundaries, hopefully, before you get to that point, would be a wise thing. But for some of you, you're probably already there. My guess is in a room this size, there's some of you who are feeling that. It's like you just have had it up to here, and everybody wants everything from you right now. Well, again, I suggest you start slow and start to look at the places where you feel you can make some changes. So for me, I had to look at, I was very involved in my work, in my relationship. I don't have children, so for me it was a little simpler than it will be for some of you. And I was also very active in some political organizations. And I remember, this was several years ago, with a therapist just saying to me, well, couldn't you, I was the president of the NOW chapter at that time, along with everything else I was doing, and she said, well, couldn't you just give up NOW, that's the National Organization for Women, for a year? Now, this may sound crazy to some of you, but that was my example. It was like, I couldn't even conceive of not doing that. It was like they needed me, Well, I got to a point where I had to give up some things, and that happened to be one of the things I chose to give up in my life. But my point here is that we all only have X amount of energy, X amount of time, and how we, and our talents, we all have our talents, whether we've uncovered them yet or not, and it's how we use our time and our talents that determines how we feel about our lives. Because your time is your investment in your life. So how you choose to use your time is very, very important. And where you choose to give your time. Your time is a gift, whether you're giving it to your children or to a job outside the home, to your husbands, to your friends, to your church, whatever else is in your life. Your time is a gift that you got to where I wouldn't answer my door. I was divorced at this time, so I lived alone, and I wouldn't answer my door or my telephone unless I really wanted to talk to someone, because I didn't know how to say no. I'm busy right now, or I'm doing something else, or I just need to rest, or whatever. Well, I don't have to do that any longer. But it's what I needed at the time, because I had so many friends in my life who were just always dropping by, and I wasn't strong enough at the time to be able to go to my door and say, I really care about you or whatever, but this just isn't a good time. I need some time to rest, or I need some time to do this, that, or the other. Now the people in my life know, that if they come to my door, without calling, I will answer the door now, but I may say, this isn't a good time. The good side of this, though, is that my friends and my loved ones know that when I'm with them, I am really with them. It's because I want to be with them. It's not because I said 2 weeks ago I would do this, that, or the other. It's because I'm making a conscious choice that this is where I want to put my time right now. And so I'm fully present, and I'm with that person or those people. And that's the gift we can give. When we go ahead and live out of obligation, though, we end up resenting people. We end up thinking they did this to us instead of, wait a minute, we chose to put ourselves in that situation too. So recognizing these physical and mental and emotional kind of boundaries and respecting them in ourselves and other people opens up unlimited energy. Now, did you catch the paradox? I said a few minutes ago that we have a limited amount of energy. Well, I really believe we have unlimited energy available, unlimited power available when we are living in harmony with what it is we need to be doing in our lives. That means living in balance. It means balancing all the aspects of who we are, attending to our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual needs. And if we're doing that, we do have unlimited energy available to us, unlimited power. But when we don't respect those boundaries, we start to feel a lot of chaos in our lives, a lot of confusion, generally a lot of resentment, and we think someone else did this to us and someone put us in this situation. Okay, now the fourth point of power is to take responsibility for your experience. And I think it's important with responsibility that we break this word down into its two words. It's simply the ability to respond. It's the ability to make choices. Because we confuse responsibility a lot in our culture. Many of us have confused it with blame. Like that's your responsibility, meaning that's your fault, or you should be responsible for da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Responsibility is simply the ability to respond or the ability to make choices.
So I'm going to repeat what I said a few minutes ago, and that is, to the extent that we can eliminate blame in our lives, blaming anything outside of ourselves for not being happy, not being fulfilled, we will open up choice. And that's what all of this is about. It's about, if this is your little circle of choice right now, just opening it up a little bit and more and more and more. Because that's what this is really about, is expanding our options in our lives, expanding our choices. Because whatever the circumstances that you're dealing with, there are numerous ways to look at that situation. And anything that you're feeling stuck with in your own life right now, if you could just get a larger perspective, it would probably help you see some other alternatives to the situation that you're in. So beginning to eliminate blame. Another part of this taking responsibility is to start living our own lives and stop trying to control other people. This is back to the codependent stuff. You know, it's the idea that if we're fulfilling what we think are everybody else's needs, then they're going to take care of our needs. So the other side of the person who's taking care of all those needs for everyone else is, she or he generally is also trying to control that other person. We're trying to make our children and our partners frequently into exactly what we think they ought to be, instead of the journey in this relationship, both with your children and your partners, is really to get to know each other. I mean, relationships, when we really start living our own lives, relationships become a gift in our lives. But most of us, we base relationships on need. It's like, I need this, and this in a relationship. And for many of us, we find we're not getting that because we're looking outside of ourselves for the parts that we're really supposed to do ourselves. And as we begin to really live our own lives and take responsibility for our own experiences, the relationships in our lives really do become a gift. And they shift in really dramatic ways. It's another way of talking about this is that your relationships mirror what's going on inside of you. So that if you think about, let's get away from your intimate relationships in your life and think for a minute about the person that you most admire. Could be someone that you know, or it might be a religious figure or a historical figure, someone that you truly admire. They embody all of the qualities that you think are just wonderful qualities for a human to hold. And also think about the person who most gets to you, who really just, every time you see this person, you really feel like that person is just a jerk, or whatever. What I would suggest to you is that both of those individuals have qualities that are within you. The person who really gets to you, those qualities are probably qualities that you need to work through in your own life, that you're not recognizing in yourself. And the person who you truly admire, that part is in you as well. That is a quality within you that's calling to come out. It would take a lot more time, because probably some of you out there think, oh, she's crazy saying that. I really believe this is true, and I think there's a lot of evidence for it, that the people in our lives are teachers. They are here to teach us. Teach us how to love is really underneath it all. But it's, well, in my marriage, I got married very young, and in spite of what everyone says about don't get married young because you haven't had experience and all that, I did anyway, and we really actually had a very good marriage for 7 years. But I kept feeling like something was going on, and my husband kept denying it, and we were supposed to be, this was in the early 70s, and we were young hippies and all of this kind of thing, and we were supposed to have this open relationship and all this honesty. And I was convinced that he was having an affair with my best friend. And 2 years after it happened, I found out I was right. And, of course, that was it for me. I ended the marriage over that, and probably a lot of other things, probably the fact that we were so young when we got married, to tell you the truth. But I share that with you because now, as I look back on that, and my ex-husband and I are great friends now, but as I look back on that, I spent 2 years thinking that he was lying to me, and he was. But the more important issue is that I was also lying to myself because I knew what was going on. And for whatever reason, I just kept denying it and hoping, that he was really telling me the truth. Now, I recognize that this afternoon I've given you all some of the heavier duty examples as we've talked about some of these, but the kinds of principles I'm talking about do apply with the little examples in our lives or with the bigger issues. So that I really believe that all of the relationships in our lives, our partners, our friends, our children, can teach us about who we are and about the areas that we need to work on to become better human beings, to become more whole and more healthy, more in harmony. Now, obviously, and that's a good situation to use an example. I mean, for him to be a healthy, whole human being, he also needs to heal that part of him that could be dishonest in a relationship. But that's his work, not mine. And that's my point here, is that if we can always bring it back to what's the lesson here for me, then we at least can use every situation in our life as an opportunity to learn. Even the painful ones we can learn from. Now, the positive, joyful experiences we can also learn from. But again, those are not the ones that are holding us back, so we don't need to focus on that quite as much this afternoon. The other part about the taking responsibility is, of course, I think I said this a little bit earlier, accepting all of who you are. If you could really begin to just accept yourself exactly as you are right now, with all the ideas that you have in your mind or all the plans you have of the changes you'd like to make or the things you'd like to see different, if you could really just accept yourself the way you are right now and know that you are perfect, you are exactly where you're meant to be right now, then it would allow you to open up to more changes. Because, again, that's what God does for us, or that's what Jesus, or if you have, I hope that all of you have some sort of faith that helps to ground you in this physical world, because if you don't, I encourage you, just work with these 5 points of power. They will guide you into some spiritual work, because they are all based, they're very, very, very similar to the basic principles of Christianity, I believe. So accepting yourself just as you are, treating yourself the way Jesus would treat you, will help you grow in ways that you cannot even imagine right now. And I've already mentioned the letting go of the past and the fear of the future, of the learning to stay in the present will help you grow. And the last point of power that I want to talk about a little bit is keeping your agreements. And this means both the agreements you make in the external world as well as those that you make with yourself internally. Let's talk about those you may make with yourself. I mentioned earlier that I see 4 aspects of who we are as human beings: the mental, physical, emotional, and the spiritual. And all of those 4 aspects of us, of who we are as human beings, need attention. And I believe they all need daily attention. That we all have a need to allow those parts of us to grow. So an easy one to talk about would be the physical. You know, it's real funny. We live in a culture that I read recently only about 10% of the American public exercises regularly. And isn't that interesting, since we know that that's one of the healthiest things we can do to not only prolong our lives, but also to feel more energy along the way. And nutrition is another one. You know, most of us, again, largely because we live such harried lives, eat a lot of junk, and a lot of sugar and a lot of fast food and that kind of stuff. And we know that this stuff is literally killing us. It's not good for us. So what is it in us that we fail to take the time to nourish those parts of ourselves? Well, I think it also has to do with not including yourself in who it is you're taking care of. Because for most of us, the excuses we give for not exercising or even for not eating better, it takes a lot longer to prepare a good, healthy meal than it does to stop at McDonald's or Pizza Hut. So it's beginning to value yourself and your families enough to take that kind of time. But just for yourself, one of the things I tell people a lot about exercise, because this was the hard one for me, the other areas I enjoy focusing on a lot more. Or at least I could say that a year ago. It was giving attention to the emotional work I had to do and the mental work and the spiritual. For me, came much sooner than giving the attention to the physical. And a little over a year ago, I decided that I was going to have to get more physically healthy because I'm going to turn 40 this summer, and I don't want to have the second half of my life be less energetic physically. Let me just put it that way. It's already much better up here emotionally and mentally than I ever dreamed it could be. But the issue of taking care of myself physically for me was a lot harder because it was like it just took too much discipline and too much time. Well, December a year ago, I decided, okay, this is it. I'm going to get this one in line too before I turn 40. And last year, I kept track of exercising, and what I encourage you to do if you're not exercising is just think of things that get your body moving. You don't have to do aerobics or ride a bicycle. What do you like to do? Playing with children is tremendous exercise, depending on what you're doing. Walking. Most of us enjoy walking if you have somewhere pretty to walk. Whatever. Dancing. The square dancing is a wonderful exercise. So looking for those things that don't feel like exercise, but they feel like exercise. My body's getting utilized. It's like, again, think back to children. We don't have to tell children, well, I shouldn't say this these days. I mean, with the TV stuff, sometimes we do have to tell children to get out and play and be active. But in general, children do this naturally because our bodies were meant to be active. We're meant to move and feel good. So we can learn this from children. So for me, sometimes I ride a stationary bike, but I'm a new Star Trek fan, so it's great fun for me to watch Star Trek and ride a bike. Or I walk on the beach, and around here, needless to say, that does not feel like I'm doing exercise when I take a nice brisk walk on the beach. Or I go dancing, and that's the last thing that feels like exercise to me. But every time I did these things, the minimum number of minutes that I counted for a real exercise workout, I was marking it on my calendar. And at the end of last year, I had exercised 4.7 times a week, the whole year. Now, I feel more proud of that than a lot of things I've done in my life because what I'm proud of is the fact that I finally realized that my physical body is also a part of all of this whole of who I am, this whole person. And I feel so much more energy now that I'm taking care of that piece. I've also changed my diet quite a bit and do eat much healthier. And I feel so much more energy. Well, my father is now 70 years old, and I got him, he's been exercising, and he's the one that's been telling me, you really ought to start exercising before you're 40, because I wish I had done this. And he goes swimming, like, I think it's 3/4 of a mile that he does, like 4 or 5 days a week, at 70 years old. Well, he's also diabetic. Now I've got him doing this food combining that I do, this Fit for Life book, which is really very nutritious, healthy food combining. And he's been able to cut down his insulin because he's eating so much healthier. Now, of course, he had to eat healthier than most of the American people do anyway because he was diabetic. But it's interesting to me because he was 70, and he is 70, and he's only been doing this food combining since Christmas time. And I've talked to him regularly, of course, and he's feeling better and better all the time. So I don't want to hear from any of you, well, if I was 40 again, I could do all this. Or if I was whatever the age is. Because I don't care where you are in your life right now. All of these things can help you feel more alive and more empowered in your daily life. Okay, that was all about keeping your agreements, though, wasn't it? And those are internal ones. And I guess I had to share one with you that for me was a real tremendous commitment. And I am still carrying it out this year as well. Equally, keeping your external agreements is very important because it opens you up to energy. You feel more empowered because you're following through. You're doing what you said you were going to do, that sort of thing. And others count on you. And you all know people in your lives that you can count on, that when they say they're going to do something, they do it. And you probably have a lot more respect for that person than the one who, well, she says this all the time, but you kind of never know she's going to follow through. So you just get to the point where you don't even count on that person. Well, I suspect that most of us, when we take the time to think about it, we want to be the one who can be counted on. So, of course, that also means be careful what agreements you make. Make sure you're only making agreements that you want to follow through on. And also recognize that you're human, and so regardless of how much of everything we're talking about this afternoon you are or begin to do in your life, you will break agreements because it happens. The important piece there then is to just acknowledge it, and if there's an apology that's due, be sure and make that, and then go on with your life. But what happens to many of us is, we continue to say we're going to do things that we don't follow through on, and not only are we not following through, but we also learn that we can't count on ourselves, that we can't count on what we're saying even means anything. So it's an important part of developing personal power. Another piece around this keeping your agreements that's important in terms of developing personal power is if you know anything about working with affirmations, to the extent that you keep agreements with yourself and with others, that energy is opened up to where the affirmations you're working with in your life will work. Now let me just say a little bit about affirmations, because some of you may not know what I'm talking about. But working with affirmations is another tremendous tool for developing personal power. Because as I said earlier, it's what we tell ourselves about the situations in our lives that's important. It's not necessarily the circumstance that's getting us stuck or holding us back. It's what we're telling ourselves about that situation. So affirmations, how many of you don't know anything about affirmations? Anyone in here? Or all? So most of you, a little bit? Okay, well, you hear a lot about this these days. It's like everywhere I go, people are talking about affirmations, So affirmations are simply creating positive statements that are in the present tense about whatever the issue you want to work on. So, for example, let's just say you want to be more assertive in your life. You want to be able to assert what it is you want and need in your life. So an affirmation around that would be, I now assert my needs easily and effortlessly. Now, this may sound like, oh yeah, okay, more hocus pocus up there, but what's important about making these positive statements is that it sets the intention for what you're trying to bring about in your life. Now, the other side of that is it will also raise whatever is blocking you from attaining that goal. So let me give you another one. I'm now experiencing my perfect creative expression. Now, this could be through your work. It could be through some kind of art, or, it might be anything in your life. I'm going to use that one because I like that one right now. If you work with whatever the one you may want to work with in your life, if you will take these affirmations, just create a very simple statement, start writing it down, saying it out loud, and writing it over and over. What happens is, if you say, I'll go back to I'm now an assertive person, you'll begin to raise the kinds of things that you think are preventing you from being that. So I am now an assertive person, blah, 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 blah. But women aren't supposed to be assertive. That might come up for you. I'm trying to kind of rush through this, and I know it may be difficult to grasp what I'm saying, but the point being, if you start to make a positive statement about any goal you're working on and just pretending that it's true right now, you start writing it out. Whatever resistance comes up in you, whatever statement that says you can't have that or you can't be that way, write that one down, say on the other side of the paper. Turn over the paper and write it down. And then go back to writing the affirmation. And then another resistance comes up, write it down. What you will have on the back of that page is all of the beliefs that you have that are keeping you from attaining that goal. And then you can start working with those beliefs. So, one other point around this would be, a lot of people work on, you can work with this with relationship, with career, with money. Some people, any goal, okay. But the one piece about it is to be very careful not to try to make a statement about something that you know you can't handle. So that if you say you're trying to work on financial security in your life, and you start with an affirmation, I'm going, not going, that would be in the future tense. You want to keep it present. I now win the $3 million lottery. Well, I wish I could remember these statistics, but it's very interesting. I heard this the other day from someone who was speaking about most of the people who win the lottery, within 2 years. I mean, it's like 80 or 90% of them, within 2 years, all of that money is gone. The point being that they really weren't ready to win that $3 million lottery. So you may not want to start with a $3 million lottery. You may want to start with, all of my creditors are paid in full, easily and effortlessly. If you're ready for the $1 million and you know how you're going to use that, go for it. But I think we really always get what it is we want and need when it's in line with the universe, when it's in that divine plan of abundance for us in our lives. And that is there, I believe, for all of us. But when we don't know how to use it, we will lose it as quickly as we gain it. If you get that lottery and you don't, to me, I could sit back here and say, well, probably those people didn't know how to tithe that money or to use that money for the good of all, because we live in a time where there's obviously a tremendous amount of chaos in the world and so much need out there. So I don't think it's a time where we want to kind of go off to just take care of our own little needs. We want to always be attuned to taking care of ourselves, but also taking care of each other and of the larger world as a whole. And this is where I do believe this work of developing our own power allows us to then find out, uncover what our gifts are to give to the world. We may not all be Helen Keller or Einstein or Madame Curie or the great inventors, artists, thinkers of our time, but we all come into this world with very unique gifts and very unique talents. And our work really is to uncover those talents and to make sure that we're using them. And by that I mean that we're using them on a daily basis. I got into the issue of power because I believe that how we treat each other in a day-to-day setting, how we treat our families, how we treat ourselves, our friends, makes a difference in the world as a whole. That again, back to the example, if you could treat yourself the way Jesus would treat you, and if you could treat everyone around you that way, we would not have the problems that we have in the world. Now, I used to come from the other, the larger perspective, thinking I had to be out on the front lines of political activism, and that's how you change the world. Well, I think that has a place. But what I wasn't doing at that much younger age was I didn't realize that it all started here, so that I was out on those picket lines with a lot of anger in my heart. And I don't think we get what it is we need to get and what we need to uncover and follow through. Doesn't really happen when there's anger, because it's the anger that gets in the way. So that whatever the work is you choose in your life and how you work with your families, if you're coming from that place of love, that's really all that matters, because the rest of it will be taken care of. And I would like to stop now for because we've got 10 more minutes, I believe, and see if there's some questions. And I think if you could either come up here or I can repeat the question so we could have it on the tape. Any? Well, let's see. Let me make a couple more comments, and if you have questions, please feel free. I hope I haven't gone too quickly through all this. This is everything I've been sharing with you really is how I live my life now. It's not, these are not things I've read and learned through books, although books for me are a tremendous tool as well. I do seek out a lot of my own information for my growth as well as inspiration through reading, but not everybody does that. So what I've been sharing with you really are the things that have been working for me in my life that have allowed me to feel a much greater sense of power and certainly a much greater sense of control over what's going on in my life. So let me leave you with a few thoughts. And one of those would be, if you can approach your life as a schoolroom, you know that we're here to learn. I believe we're here to learn to love, but whatever is your belief, that we are here to learn, and every opportunity can be every situation in your life can be an opportunity to learn. And think of the analogy of, if you have a child in the 3rd grade, you wouldn't go around beating that child over the head because they don't know how to do geometry. Most of us, though, go around belittling ourselves, berating ourselves, because we're not far enough along on this path. We haven't grown enough. We haven't learned enough. I don't think that's how Jesus would treat us. I think he would say, you're perfect just the way you are, and you might want to look at this too and try this a little bit differently. So keep that in mind as life is a schoolroom. And also that there are really no mistakes, just lessons. Many of the people who have become very famous, Einstein was one, who talked about if he hadn't been willing to fail, what we call failure, over and over and over, he never would have made the kinds of discoveries he did. And most people who become real empowered in their life, whatever their work may be, will tell you that same thing. It's that they still feel the fear that each of us feels when we face new changes or new challenges in our lives. But the difference is they push through the fear and go ahead and make those changes. And lastly, if you can change your thoughts, change how you look at the situation, change your beliefs, you can change your world. And so I encourage you to do it with compassion for yourself and for those you care about. And I hope you have a great remainder of your convention.
Does anybody have any questions before we break? If not, like in the first session, I reminded you, there's survey sheets back there, and we would like very much for you to fill them in and turn them out here in this room before you leave Wednesday. In fact, if you can, by Tuesday evening. All of our programs come from that, and I need your input. And I'd like to thank Julie very much. And would you all give